Understanding the dimensionlessness of conscious space. The dimensionlessness of conscious space probably needs more discussion. The premise that we start with is that before the beginning there was absolute nothing. There was no matter, and there was no energy, and maybe therefore no quantum fields, and there was no space. Matter is made out of energy, but it is still useful to think of them as separate things. The no space part of this is the most difficult to grasp. We naturally think of space as an ever-present background reality that infinitely extends out in 3 dimensions. It boggles the mind to try to think of no space. But we can conceive of other spaces than our 3-dimensional space. So our space could have been a 4-dimensional space, for example. A 4-dimensional space is a very different thing than a 3-dimensional space. The point is that if space can be different things, then space is a thing. And like all things, we conclude that space can exist or not exist. It is not the always present background reality that we assume it is. Space is always a relationship between physical objects. We could ask if space even really exists as a physical phenomenon in a universe. If a universe consists of 3-dimensional objects, then the space will apparently be 3-dimensional. Similarly, if a universe consists of 4-dimensional objects, then the space will apparently be 4-dimensional. However, 3-dimensionality, or the 4-dimensionality of the space, is really only a relative relationship among the objects. We begin to suspect that without physical objects, space does not even make sense. In fact, maybe there is no such thing as an independently existing space, but rather space is some kind of property of physical matter. Just riffing a little here with this last sentence. There are no absolute locations in space, because there is no zero reference point. There are only relative distances between objects in space. So a location for anything must be relative to something else. Locations do not even make sense if there are no physical objects. If there is only one object in the universe, we can ask the question, where is it? It cannot have a relative location to any other object. If the object moves to a new location, where is it? There would not be a way to measure the difference of the new location to the original location. Did it move a foot, a mile, or a light year? There would also be no way to know if the object is moving or is stationary. If there were any other object in the universe, observers do not count as other objects, we might be able to figure out the new location relative to the other object. But what if the other object was also moving? There will never be a method to measure an absolute location in the universe, but we do seem to be able to measure relative locations if there are multiple objects. Since space is only needed when there are physical objects in a universe, and since conscious space has no physical objects, there is no need for spatial dimensions. This is why we can say that conscious space is dimensionless. You might think that if conscious space has no dimensions, then we should not call it a space at all. But conscious space contains things, so it is proper to call it a space. Conscious space is more like an abstract space from mathematics, similar, for example, to the space of all polynomial functions. Polynomial functions can be multidimensional, but the abstract space where they reside is dimensionless. Conscious space contains all conscious minds, and it is where all conscious experience happens. Conscious minds and conscious experiences do not need dimensional space for their existence. But conscious minds can connect to physical objects like a 3-dimensional human brain. In the human brain case, redness seems to be a 2-dimensional patch phenomenon that is painted onto our visual experience. But the 2-dimensionality of the redness patch is a result of our 2-dimensional retina. Redness is a conscious experience that can take on any number of dimensions depending on the physical universe the conscious mind is connected to. People will say that redness can be different shapes, like a red square or a red circle, and that the shape is a property of the redness. But redness does not have the property of shape. The redness in the square is the same redness as is in the circle. It would be like saying that water in a square cup is different than water in a circular cup. The water is the same because the shape is not a property of water. When a conscious mind is connected to a 3-dimensional brain, the conscious mind will take on the dimensionality of the 3-dimensional brain and a 2-dimensional retina. Similarly, when a conscious mind is connected to a 4-dimensional brain, the conscious mind will take on the dimensionality of the 4-dimensional brain and a 3-dimensional retina. But the conscious mind as a thing in itself is dimensionless. It is not a physical thing. A conscious mind might even be able to act in dimensions higher than the physical space that exists. In this way, our normal physical space will be presented as a three-dimensional flat hyperplane for a conscious mind to connect with. This will make it easy for the conscious mind to connect with a particular cortex and be isolated from other cortexes in our space. This also implies that the conscious mind is not ever in our physical space, even when connected. This is a difficult topic for our 3D limited brains that needs more consideration and investigation. Flat three-dimensional hyperplanes are virtually impossible for the human mind to visualize, but they can be comprehended using various visualization methods as depicted in exploring the fourth dimension using animations.